Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar for today, Developing High Potential Talent for the World That's Coming, sponsored by BTS Group. I'm your host and moderator, Claude Werder. I'm excited to welcome our experts from BTS, Nancy Cramton, Senior Director of the BTS Leadership Center of Excellence, and Matt Kleinman, Senior Director of Talent Insights and Assessment. Welcome to you both. They have a wealth of knowledge to share. This is going to be a great conversation. A big thank you to BTS for sponsoring the event today. BTS is a global consultancy that helps organizations turn strategy into action by equipping their people with the skills, mindsets, and behaviors to lead, sell, and perform when it counts most. BTS partners with senior leaders and teams to accelerate leadership performance, drive transformation, and create lasting business impact from the C-suite to the front lines. Before we dive into today's content, let me tell you a little bit about Brandon Hall Group and some great opportunities we have. We're a leading professional development firm that has been serving learning, talent, and HR executives and professionals worldwide for more than 33 years. We've advanced the growth and performance of millions of employees and leaders through our cloud-based platform, the Institute, delivering evidence-based research, data, and certification programs that empower organizations to achieve excellence in every area of human capital management. Our impact spans more than 10 million employees and executives globally, supported by our comprehensive research library, strategic insights, and prestigious awards program. The slide shows a sample of the organizations we're proud to partner with. Registration is opening up, or actually is open, for our HCM Excellence Conference. That's February 9th to 12th, coming right up. This is where the top minds in human capital management come together. We're really excited and hope you can join us. We also invite you to participate in our research studies. Links will be available after the webinar, and you can always visit brandonhall.com. We actually have a research question for you in just a couple of minutes. A few logistics to share. If you have any questions during the webinar, please use the questions panel on our control bar. We'll be looking at them as we go along. We're also recording the webinar, and you'll receive an email within 24 hours with a link to the recording and a PDF of the slides. The chat box is open, so feel free to share your thoughts. We'll be prompting you to do that a little bit. We hope you'll share your comments. The more we can interact together, the more we'll all benefit. And next, we just want to let you know about a raffle that we will have at the end of the webinar. If we could advance to that. Yep. One more, there we go. At the end, we'll have a webinar and we'll select one winner to have $100 off a membership to the Brandon Hall Group Institute. So you do need to be present to win. So we'll name somebody at the end of the webinar. So now, before I turn it over to Nancy and Matt, we have one research question for you. If you can advance to that. There we go. Yeah, just want to take a couple minutes to get your opinion on this. Here we have the 4 phases of leadership development. And we ask about this so to inform our HR Outlook report, which is a big report that comes out every January. And we kind of want to get a sense of where people are in their development and their maturity of leadership development. So we want to ask you to let us know what phase most closely matches where you think your organization is in leadership development. Is it phase 1, which is very reactive and ad hoc, just really getting started with leadership development? Or is it phase 2, which we call the development stage? You've got a structured leadership program at defined levels. You've got a leadership pipeline defined, but you're still developing. Maybe you're using a little AI in pilots. Phase 3 would be what we call strategic. That's where your leadership development strategy really aligns with business priorities. You're beginning strategic AI deployment. You're using predictive analytics, perhaps, for leadership potential. And then phase four is when leadership development really functions as a transformational strategic partner, fully aligned, mature AI. This is where you're close to optimize in your approach. So, Ivy, if you want to launch the poll, we'd ask you to indicate which uh, is most closely associated with where your organization is now. Phase one, reactive; phase two, standardized or developing; stage three, strategic; or phase four, optimize. It'll be interesting to see where everybody sits, and I can tell you what we've found so far in the other times we've asked this research question. So, Abby, what do we see? So most people, 44% are in phase two, which is just developing. We also have quite a few in phase one. So I think we're going to have a lot of information for you today that's going to be really helpful in moving up on those phases. So in previous polls, about 12% are in phase four, about 20% in phase one. Phase two is 36%, and phase three is 32%. So a little bit different with this audience, which is great. I'm glad to get more opinions. So we're getting ready to get started. Let me go over what we're going to cover today. BTS has a great approach to high potential development, and they use something called future back thinking. And we're going to go into that and explain that to you. It's a really helpful way to think differently about how to identify high potential. We're also going to talk about how different organizations define and develop high potentials and a model for that, and then research-based frameworks to identify and accelerate high potentials. So before we do that, we'll just lay a little groundwork for you with Brandon Hall Group data. This data comes on this slide from a poll of our Excellence Award winners for high potential development. So when it comes to assessing and identifying high potential employees, most organizations still use processes that have been in place for 50 years or more, such as backwards facing performance ratings and past achievements. Also the level of experience and manager nominations. Now, 44%, which is pretty good, use psychometric and personality assessments. 28% leverage behavioral interviews, and only 17% assess employees to understand what their aspiration and career goals are. And we're going to be talking more about that. We're going to ask you a poll question about this in just a minute. The other slide I wanted to share real quick is different approaches that organizations use for high potential development. When it comes to developing this kind of talent, 94% of our award-winning organizations use coaching and mentoring. Most organizations also use stretch assignments or cross-functional projects, but far fewer, about 1/5 to 1/3, use approaches like job rotations or business simulations or providing high potential talent with enhanced responsibilities to build their skills. So that's kind of what we're seeing, and would love your comments on where you are. You can put those in the chat if you'd like. And then we'll ask you one poll question here before I turn it over to Nancy. So the poll question is, how would you describe where you are in terms of your organization's current approach to identifying high potential talent? Do you use a structured, validated assessment model? Are you relying primarily on manager nominations and performance ratings? Are you still in development of an identification process, or you don't have a formal high potential process at all? Or maybe you're not sure where you are or what's going on. So if you could choose one of those, we'll get a sense of where everybody is, and then we'll start digging in. So what do we have? So let's see, about 35% are relying primarily on manager nominations and performance ratings, which aligns with our research. 29% are still in the process of developing their identification process. So that's really good because that's what we're going to talk about today, and hopefully we can give you a lot of good information so you can move forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nancy to get us started, and I'm really excited to hear what we've got.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claude. We're thrilled to be here. And for those of you who don't happen to know who we are, BTS, and you may be confusing us with the Korean boy band, just want to give you a little bit more context. Although, quite honestly, we do get their emails sometimes, but we've been around a little longer. We've been around for 40 years. We're a strategy execution firm, but we focus on the people side of strategy, how you accelerate getting people, hearts and minds aligned with the mindset and capabilities needed to execute against strategy. Some of you know us as a simulation company because 40 years ago when we started, that was kind of the root of our company. We have really deep expertise in modeling people's business strategies and building really sophisticated business simulations. But we're a lot more than that. And I'm not going to clear this slide, but just to give you context for those who don't know us in terms of the many different areas that we have capabilities and expertise. And when you think about high potentials, they have to cut across a lot of these centers for expertise. You have today two of us who represent two different centers. I sit in the Leadership Development Center, and I'm joined by my colleague Matt, who sits in assessment. And so, again, not going too deeply here, but when we think about high potentials, just to kind of give it a little bit of the landscape of what we're seeing and where we're in the context of high potentials, and I expect a lot of you feel this, is that um, talent shortages and transformation are putting pressure on organizations to accelerate leadership readiness. Even in a labor market that's cooling and there's no hire, fire kind of concepts, but there's traditional programs are often seen as being too generic or too slow, and often based on historical leadership needs versus kind of the future readiness needs. And it's leaving a lot of leaders unprepared kind of for the future. That's what we're seeing, we're hearing from our clients, that's what we're seeing kind of in the marketplace. And it really lends to the question, how can organizations first make sure they're clear on who really is our high potentials and how can we scale differentiated, really effective development? All of this in the context of what the landscape that we put on here is, people who are promising, given where things are going with AI. It's a real disruptive space that we're in right now and being thoughtful about that. So we're going to take a look at things in the context of how do we show up in these moments? For those who are on the call, we're leaders in the organizations that we're operating, trying to drive and support our strategies around talent. So we're going to throw ourselves into a talent leadership moment. So I'm going to ask people to, I'm going to actually read this out loud. I'm going to throw in my radio voice for this one. You are the head of talent management with responsibility for cultivating a robust future leadership pipeline. You've been asked to partner with the learning and development team to stand up a new high potential approach that prepares leaders with the capabilities needed for navigating your organization into the future. You know you need to start with identifying your hypos, and the board is pressing for visible progress, citing the need to manage succession risk. Business leaders are vocal. They believe they already know who the high potentials are and expect to be part of the selection process. There's no clear or defined definition of high potential. Performance data is being used as a proxy. You feel the tension between moving fast to show results and ensuring the program has a solid foundation. You need to decide how to proceed. Dun, dun, dun. Okay. Now, often when we run these sort of sessions, there will be a very robust discussion right now around the moment that you're in and what matters in this moment and the tensions that are real. And then we throw you into a breakout room and you have a dialogue. But right now, you get to have a conversation with yourself. I'm going to leave this up here. I want everybody to read through options A, B, and C. I'm going to give everybody a few minutes to read this, to ponder. All of you would want an option D, I expect, but we're going to force you to choose one of these. And in a couple minutes, Ivy's going to throw up the poll for us. And so just read through this. We'll give you a minute to read through it and absorb it, and then we're going to post a poll in a moment. All right, folks. I know silence is deadly. Right, so we've got option A, start with the current knowns. Option B, build with the business. Option C, slow down to align. Ivy, would you mind launching a poll for everybody to weigh in and put their stamp on what they would do in this situation if they were only given one of these three choices? All right, we'll give folks a few minutes to throw something in here. All right, shall we share the results? I'm seeing the
There we go.
vast majority has put down the third option here, slow down to align. Um, what I really like though, can I ask people to throw in the chat, is this actually what we do? Slow down to align? Or is this just hypothetically what we do if we felt we had the ability to do slow down the line? I want to understand if this is real to us or just what our ideal or our optimal. So yes, see, I'm loving that, Troy. Thank you. What we wish we would do, what we would wish we would
Wish we
do,
just,
right?
yeah,
I'm seeing a number of kind of mixed here that's
yeah.
optimal. Claude, I'd love, what are you seeing from Brandon Hall in this type of situation? What's the experience that you've encountered in working with clients between who are kind of faced with this type of situation?
Yeah, when we're talking to clients who are actually doing this, I would say the vast majority are going with option A, unfortunately. And most of them would, like our audience, would like to do option C. I feel like option C is the way we need to go because most organizations just aren't doing this the right way. And at some point we need to correct course. So slowing down, aligning, making sure we're doing things the right way is the best way to do. But I think people are still pulled to what people are asking of them and not necessarily doing what they think is actually right.
Yeah, and that's pretty consistent what we find too when clients come to us, and because they come to us at different phases, at different moments in time, and different people within the client, whether it's talent and organizational development, or whether they're leaders, learning and development, kind of as we think about this phase. And we do find that often there's a real pressure because leaders feel really passionate about leadership in their organization. So with that passion comes the desire to put their own thumbprint on it and the belief that they know what's best for the organization. And sometimes it can be hard to kind of move people along to something that is like, let's pull back here. We may need to
Yeah.
look at this a little bit differently. So I think we all get a sense of what the more ideal is, that kind of slowing down to align and as you go through the checks here. But I'm going to throw it over to my colleague here, Matt, that's going to talk a little bit more around, from our view, when we're working with clients who kind of have that appetite and intention to slow down in line, some of the ways that we go about that and the way that we support them to do that. Matt.
Great. Thanks, Nancy. And thanks again, everybody, for being here. There's a punchline I'll add to the moment as well, too, which is that you might find yourself in any of those scenarios at any given point in time within the same organization or in other companies.
Yeah.
And so option C is ideally what you would do, but there may be other situational constraints that you have to work through first to get there. And so some of what we want to talk about is at least a framework for how to think about wherever you might find yourself, moving a little bit closer to the ideal state and where you want to be. So starting with this slide, we wanted to zoom out a bit and just share a bit of an overview of how we think about defining and measuring high potential in general. And the first thing I would say is high potential really has to be thought of as a system of elements. It's not a single label, it's not a one-time process, but it's different integrated stages and components that come together. And the four components that we have are around identification, assessment, accelerating readiness through development, and then an ongoing monitoring process. And to just quickly highlight each of these pieces, identification in this space is really about having that clear understanding of where the business is going. So it's not only about finding individuals, it actually starts with thinking about the organizational context and what it takes to get there from a capability standpoint. And we'll spend some time talking about one way we do that, which is through future back thinking in a couple of minutes. We also have assessment, which is near and dear to my heart. As Nancy mentioned, that's how I spend most of my time at BTS. And it's really about looking at the behavioral evidence that helps separate performance and finding people who might be good performers from potential. And using different pieces of evidence like simulations, or 360-degree feedback, or other psychometric tools that help you really triangulate on a view of the whole person to get a sense of where they are in terms of the potential spectrum and how to help them continue to grow and maximize their contributions. We then move into accelerating readiness, which is really around building the future skills that meet both the individual's need and the organization's needs. So sometimes we hear about digital and AI literacy, adaptive mindsets, cross-boundary leadership. Those are pretty common capabilities, but we also need real data on observable elements to be able to do any of this acceleration well. And Nancy will share more about ways that we accelerate development for potential. And then finally this is a system, and it's also a system that repeats and may experience change over time. So having a process to monitor the pipeline and the broader context of the organization is important to make sure that we're identifying and conducting these pieces effectively into the future. So I mentioned we're going to focus a lot on future back thinking. Nancy could click to the next. So having a clarity around what the future needs lets us answer the question of potential for what. And again, it's moving away from just performance to understanding the traits that drive future success in your business context. That's a really key piece, and it comes up in our model too, which is not building for generic potential. It's potential for your business and what you're trying to accomplish. So when we've worked with our clients, future back thinking is actually a methodology, and it's a structured way to figure out what the future might look like and then decide on the capabilities that are needed to meet that reality. We think about it in 3 steps that come together. The first is around just having a future back session, which is an interactive meeting of key stakeholders to really push and expand the strategic thinking and options in terms of what the future would look like. And then there's an alignment element as step 2, which is aligning on the future context and also what are those next generation leadership capabilities that are really important and crucial in order to meet the expected need in the future. And then the third piece, again, is where we see the real action take place, which is around activating the profile and identifying what the capabilities are for the future through a variety of assessment and development tools that are aligned to create a cohesive end-to-end experience. And so all of these pieces together help ensure that high potential is defined in a way that's contextualized, and it's also strategic. It's not generic and not something that can just be applied as a blanket set of tools to any organization. So I'll share a couple of deep dives quickly. Go to the next one, Nancy. Thanks. So the first step around designing and delivering the future back session actually has 3 motions within it. And we'll give you an example in a minute, but just to provide the framing, the first is to think about and explore some trends or assumptions of what might actually happen in the future that could have an impact on your organization. And then that leads to the second, which is thinking about what are the scenarios when different trends and assumptions come together and collide that could be constructed and that you would have to meet and address in your organization by building leadership capability and high potentials. And then the third is after you've thought about those future states and assessed the impact and the likelihood, it's getting more concrete and tangible around the leadership requirements that are going to help you really seize those future opportunities or mitigate any risks that might come about. So you're planning proactively with an eye toward the future. And again, we are really in the business of thinking about capabilities and mindsets, all to meet those future environments. So I'll share an example. This is actually an exercise that we ran over the summer with about 18 heads of talent and learning from a variety of organizations. And we gave these 2 prompts to the group. We had them think first about a future where AI reduces the need for early career and technical expert roles. We now have AI doing all sorts of magnificent things in the future, and it has had a real dramatic impact on whether or not tasks that are normally completed by somebody who's early career or a deep expert, whether that actually has to be done. And so that's one potential trend, and I'm sure we could all think about ways that might be showing up right now. And then the other trend is we see into the future this continuing advancement of how people reprioritize your work, your career, work-life balance, the gig economy that we've heard a lot about, and have that become sort of the way that people envision what the future state of their careers looks like. And so if you collide these 2 things, we can go to I think it's on, nope, it's not on the next. Sorry, Nancy, we'll go back. If we collide them, we end up with thinking about how we have to fundamentally change the way that leadership works in organizations. So it could look like things such as leaders are now managing networks of people that are inside and outside their organization, not just their teams. From a high potential standpoint, you now need to start thinking about who are your hypos outside of organizations, having really an external network of either gig workers or people who might just exist elsewhere in the outside ecosystem that you have to track and keep an eye toward because you might need their skills and capabilities brought into your company. And it also really increases that tech fluency and adaptability and makes those essential capabilities in the organization. So you can see as you start to think about these futures and combine them, it pushes the thinking a little bit around what are those concrete scenarios that you have to build toward, and what are either the capabilities or mindsets or ways of working in your organization that have to be set up now in order to set you on the path for success.
Matt, I'm wondering if we could
Yep.
just invite a couple folks to throw in. Is there other types of trends? We just listed two here, but love to hear if folks on the line are doing this type of future back thinking, maybe in using a different term in a different way. Is there other key trends that's really hot that you're thinking about in your organization around how it might relate to your high potentials? Would love to just, if anybody's willing to throw in the chat here. And Claude, I'm wondering, I'll just put you on the spot here. From your perspective, what are you hearing from organizations as they're thinking about high potentials? Would be a trend or a consideration that people are holding in the back of their mind. And again, hoping to see some things in the chat if people are willing to share. What else are they looking at in their organizations?
Yeah, I'm finding that this is the most difficult thing that organizations do, that the whole idea of what I call jumping ahead and looking back, we talk about it as starting at the end and working backwards is a very difficult thing for organizations to do. What they tend to do is, going back to our moment, is just try to piece together a process that maybe changes a little bit about what they're doing, but still staying in line with what the business is telling them, rather than saying, okay, we really need to change the way we are looking at things and look at things 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever we think is appropriate, and then try to figure out where we need to be going. And I think it's a real struggle for organizations.
Yeah. And there's kind of that meta level of just putting yourself forward. And then there's this kind of methodology as we get really granular thinking about the things that are going to affect what our future state is about. I know, Matt, I know you've got some slides to come in here. I just wanted to give the space if folks have something interesting they wanted to share. But
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. No, it's always helpful to hear what's top of mind in the organization. So some of these themes were surfaced over the summer, but even in that time, the world has just
Things have
shifted so
changed.
dramatically.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I'm going to keep us going.
yeah. So if we go to the next, the goal, as I said before, is really to make the understanding of what's required of leaders very concrete and tangible, because then you can start to plan around it. So in the step two, we think a lot about the what, which is getting clear on the mindsets and behaviors and the differentiators that matter the most for your strategy and teasing that out of defining the future context. And then also the how, which is using the outputs to be combined with information you might have already in your organization around competencies, role data, talent strategies, and workforce planning, to really make sure that the way you think about high potentials aligns to your organizational context. And then outcome wise, the goal is you end up with a clear, content valid, and aligned high potential leadership profile, which is really your North Star for all of your talent planning. So when you think back to the moment and how to bring in leaders and manage stakeholders in the organization, this can actually be a pretty powerful way to have perspectives and voices included upfront, but from a bigger picture, forward looking standpoint, rather than just listing specific names of people that should be considered. We've done this work in a variety of contexts and in industries. The three that came top of mind for us were really one insurance organization, one organization in the restaurant and food business, and a consumer electronics organization. And in each case, the maturity and the degree of change is a little bit different, just given the challenges that they're trying to address. But some of the common themes that show up are around building a people strategy that anticipates both market changes and demographic shifts within the company. Thinking about activating a competency framework that meets the needs of driving cultural change and customer needs. And then also defining leadership, thinking into the future about the innovation and growth that has to come to the business. So in all cases, a little bit different, but they all are examples of how thinking about the future and planning in a structured way unlocks that forward-thinking talent strategy for different industries. I think we have a poll now too. I saw a couple of comments coming in the chat, but we also have a poll. So Ivy, I'll turn it back to you to put the poll up.
So real quickly,
Yep.
what we just want to ask you is to what extent your organization is redefining high potential criteria to account for various things, including AI and digital transformation. Are you significantly redefining it? Are you making a few adjustments here and there, but work is needed? Are you currently evaluating what changes are necessary? Or have you not addressed this at all in your high potential programs? And maybe this really topic hasn't really come up. It hasn't been a priority for us. So if you could choose one of those, just to get a sense of where you are in your evolution, and then we'll go ahead and move forward. So let's see. So about 31% are currently evaluating what changes are necessary. So this should really be helpful. And then another 38%, actually that's the top answer, have not addressed this in their high potential program. So hopefully we'll give you some steps that you can consider to address this.
Yeah.
Great.
And I'll tell you also, it's not entirely surprising too, because what we've observed, and I know there are external benchmarking results in the world, but the rate of change that companies use to look at their definitions of potential are typically on a few year life cycle. And so a lot of companies have had about 2 to 3 years since they've maybe last considered high potential, which takes you to before tools like ChatGPT and Claude and Copilot were really prominently featured. So for those looking at the definition now, it's a great time to be doing it just with all the transformation we've seen in the past couple of years. So I'll say a few words on the assessment component here before handing it over to Nancy. So we think about, again, the role of evidence and collecting measuring observable behavior as defining great leadership. And we use a variety of methods, like I said, simulations, 360, psychometrics. When we look at information on assessment, though, we have a 5-factor model, as we call it, which helps us parse what we expect to see among high potentials who can take on larger leadership roles in their organizations. And so this is our organizing framework for thinking about potential across the 5 domains. Briefly, the leadership maturity and aspirational mindsets, which are the 2 on the left, are really around the capacity to recognize and address one's own strengths and limitations with a desire to take on the initiative to grow and achieve more. So there are elements, you may think of concepts like learning agility that would show up here. Being self-reflective, self-awareness is a key element here as well. But being able to take those insights and orient them toward a real desire to take on more and do more. And I know earlier in this conversation, we talked a little bit about the data that Claude shared, where organizations might not be using things like career records or career aspiration statements. For us, that's actually a key part of the aspirational mindset and having people identified who want to take on more in addition to being able to. The people acumen and business acumen is about focusing the energy of people in the organizations to drive that collective success and to be able to build and navigate interpersonal relationships and manage through complex business situations. So there's the heart and smart elements that have to go together to drive the organization forward. And then something that we care a lot about in our work too is this element called the X factor, which again is the organizational context for your company in terms of what needs to be directly achieved in order to help people unlock their potential and to achieve the goals of the organization. And that's where we see a lot of the future back thinking elements come to play in particular in defining that X factor.
Matt, I'm curious. I know at the beginning here, Claude mentioned that from some of the data from Brandon Hall, he highlighted that aspirational mindset sometimes is a gap in terms of organizations that they see they're not kind of pausing and assessing for that to assume that they're engaging the person who this is part of what they want in the future. I'm curious from your perspective if there was any of these that you would highlight that, hey, from your experience where either there's a bigger gap or there's we'll call it an opportunity. What commentary would you have as you think across the organizations that we've seen as we think about the degree that they're paying attention to and considering each of these five factors?
Yeah. So for me, first, I would definitely agree that the aspirational piece isn't often looked at, and I think sometimes companies might be reticent to look at it because there's a bit of conflating somebody's own personal like drive for their own personal gain versus aspiration to do great things on behalf of the company. We think about aspiration probably angling more toward the latter, even though you have to have that want and desire to grow and take on more. But I know that there are organizations that get a little bit concerned about trying to identify people based on how much stuff that they want to take on and own because the motivation might not be aligned with what the company wants. I personally also think the business acumen piece is important, and sometimes we've talked about business acumen as almost like applied intelligence, for lack of a better term, where it's not necessarily how smart somebody is from a cognitive standpoint to do more. It's about can they understand to make sense of the business reality, spot patterns and trends, and be able to intervene in the company in a way that drives the organization forward against its own objectives. And it's a bit of a fine tuning on thinking about the intellectual piece, which gets brought into potential definition sometimes because it's very focused on business reality, forward-looking strategy, and outcomes.
And I see in the chat here, we've got a question from Sandy who's like, tell me more about that X factor. Can you bring this to life a little bit? Like, what is this ambiguous thing that we're speaking of that is unique to different companies? Can we give a couple? I mean, I got a couple, but Matt, maybe you got a couple examples that you can bring top of mind.
Yeah, I'm thinking now. I'm racking my brain around some of the clients that we're working with currently, but some ways of working. It's really where culture comes into play. So there are some ways of working where there may be, it's actually a good culture change lever too. You may be over indexing on consensus in an organization. And so when you think about high potentials in your company, if you're thinking about identifying future leaders who also can be change agents, it might be people that are just as strong in the people acumen space and getting things done, but they are able to do so in a way that brings a bit of a change in the operating model and culture for the future by not getting mired in consensus building, for instance, and are able to build coalitions and move an organization forward. That may be a particular behavioral, cultural aspect that's relevant in one company, top of mind. But Nancy, I think you may have other examples too from what you've seen.
Yeah, and so sometimes that has to do with the degree for them to be able to operate kind of with a bias to action and operating pace. If you're in a competitive landscape where the ability to move quickly, be able to operate with ambiguity and have comfort, higher risk taking appetite, because that's what your marketplace domain and your strategy calls for. And sometimes that's a shift within the organization. It's really understanding that there's elements here about how we get things done that's aligned with our strategy and moving forward in the direction that we need to pay very particular attention and may not be relevant in other organizations because they operate on a different risk frame or just in a different market context. So that's what we're talking about in that X factor is really paying attention that a leader in company A is not the same as what we need in a leader in company B. And we've got to be really clear on what's different between that because it has to do with their strategy and the way that they need to operate.
Yeah.
Does Sandy, anything else you want to ask about that or just checking in here? I know we want to keep going, but I want to honor that you had a question here. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. So, um, keeping us moving. Matt.
So, yep, I'll share a couple more thoughts on the next slide, continuing around how we actually bring all this together to mobilize identification and movement in the direction of development. So, overarching, our goal is really to integrate data that are known in the organization and what we can collect to separate people who are strong performers from people who are strong performers and have potential also. Realistically, the way that it does play out is even though we don't want to define performance and potential as being the same thing or potential as an extension of performance, a lot of times from a structured working standpoint, organizations do take performance information into account. And that's an okay thing to do if you're using it as sort of a core consideration criterion. It's not the full definition of potential, but it is something to consider when you're trying to find the people in the organization up front where you may want to dig a little bit deeper and start to invest. Nirvana is, we can assess everybody all the time and have all this ambient data and be able to find potential in any form that it comes. But we know that realistically, there is a precursor set of elements in performance that lead to people being able to demonstrate potential, take on more. When it comes to identification, we also want to introduce a deeper understanding of the values and behaviors and leadership style and use tools that'll tell us something about psychometric properties that go beyond the performance piece and really start to get at looking at potential. And then in our work, we look at all of these insights from across the board and map it to our five-factor model to have that comprehensive analysis of potential that's against the core capabilities. And also, as we just talked about with the X factor, the definition within the organization.
Megan's asking about which psychometric assessments you recommend as valid for hypo. Matt, any thoughts there?
We are comfortable using a variety. There are a lot of great ones on the market. I think Hogan's well known, OPQ is well known. And I think the difference that matters most to organizations is what delivers the level of insight and the language that'll resonate again more in your context. I know we've been able to adapt and work with different types of inputs because we then think about the analog back to the five-factor model. So I would say, there are lots of great tools. It's hard to provide a recommendation because a lot of it does come up to what is going to resonate in your organization. What are the nuances that get teased out in the results?
All right. So I think this is a moment here. We based this off the first moment that we encountered here earlier today, which was kind of getting into how do we make sure we have the right people in our pipeline from a high potential when we're thinking about a high potential program or high potential journey, so to speak. Now we're going to flip ourselves into a different moment, a different moment in time. And in this moment, you're a learning and development leadership moment, as opposed to a kind of a talent leadership. And I know we can get into the nuances of different roles in an organization, but we're just going to read through this quickly. Now, you're the head of learning and development with responsibility for building the skills and capabilities required for your organization's workforce, including the leadership pipeline. The head of talent management stops by your office, energized, but clearly under pressure. We've made great progress identifying high potentials. The board is really pleased with our identification strategies and asked to see an company development plan at the next meeting. They want to know that we're investing in our future leaders and you're the right person to bring this to life. You can tell they're proud of the progress and want to demonstrate momentum. You ask about how these individuals were identified, what kind of future roles they're being developed for, and which capabilities will matter most. They skirt most of your questions and tell you talent team has finalized who the hypos are based on our internal assessments. The group represents a mix of strong performers with perceived future potential for executive roles. We don't need to overcomplicate the development. The board just needs to see something tangible. Let's give them a program that's distinct, high quality, and visible, something focused on executive readiness. And you got to decide what it is you're going to do in this moment. So we're going to throw a few options out here. We're going to ask people to take, do you take direction? Do you basically move quickly to propose a polished, cohort-based, high potential executive program based on the things you know to be true about executive capability? They need leading change, they need influence, they need enterprise mindset, and that you build in some coaching as well as some exposure to senior leaders. Option B, do you push for clarity? Say, hey, propose a brief but focused alignment session with talent management team to clarify the why behind the program, like a high potential for what, which roles or capabilities are we building toward? You frame it as ensuring the board sees a development plan that's both credible and connected to enterprise priorities. Or C, you build your own based on your own expertise. You basically say, thank you very much, appreciate you've identified these people, and then you do your own form of assessment. You take ownership to create a program, you do your own assessment of what this group of high potentials need in terms of development, and you figure it out. Ivy, could you throw up the poll here? Let's see. Again, if people were forced to choose A, B, or C, what would you do in this moment?
This will be interesting.
Mm, yeah. I like the how we see behind the scenes. Right now, nobody wants to take direction. I'm just saying. I don't know what that means about our people, but nobody wants to take direction right now. Take the direction. All right. So let's share the results. Let's share the results. So the vast majority says we're going to push for strategic clarity. Claude, what are your thoughts? Actually, I'm going to ask the same question. Can people please put in the chat?
Yeah, I was just going to ask
Is
that.
this
Is
what
it
we really
hypothetical
do?
or is it real?
Is
Yeah.
this really what we do, or is there another thing, or at least what you actually see in the organization? I'd love to see. I know it may be what we want to do, and maybe it is what we would do personally, but if you take a look at your organization, what typically happens in your own experience in terms of is it it's more of a wish. Thank you very
It's a
much. That's what I'm
wish.
hearing in the room. That's a little bit of the wish. We wish what we could do. Um, Depending on who is giving us direction. Yeah, fair enough. There can be a
Yeah,
lot
fair enough.
on can
Yeah.
I push back on that, or do I just need to take it and run with it? And that's there's always going to be a depends. But I do find a lot of these situations, we're actually doing A now. Future iterations rely on B for sure. And that's a lot of what we see is quite honestly, often people in like particularly in my role, when people come to us, they're like, okay, we have to do this leadership, a high potential program, a leadership development program. And often they're because their streams don't necessarily interact. It's more like there's a handoff to them. We've identified the people, you go develop them. And that's just reality sometimes in organizations. And we can get to the organizational structure and all sorts of things that can contribute to that. And we might like it to be different, but people try to lean in to do the best they can with the information they have. And so we actually often see more of an A or a C. We're like, okay, we're going to do our own little assessment because B really is a pretty strong partnership across the talent
Yeah.
spectrum. And there can be just structural things that get in the way of that. Um, if we, so I'm going to share a little bit of some of our learning as we think about what sometimes get in the way of having kind of making great kind of high potential programs. And there's kind of 6 things that we've found why high potential programs can fail or maybe not hit the mark. And the first we kind of addressed, we've already been addressing it for the last half hour, right? Which is often they're just not maybe getting the right talent. They're using the existing leaders' perceptions as they hold up their thumb around what they think and the wind is blowing and who they think the right people are, and they believe these are the potential rather than something that really understands what do we mean by potential in that future, which goes into that developing the capabilities and mindsets for the future. Are they actually looking at so the right people and building the right capabilities for the leaders of the future, not just the leaders of the present or based on past? And Matt spoke to this too, not looking at high potential development as ongoing, right? Because things are going to change over time, both the marketplace, the expectations in the workforce, what's going on in terms of what we need in the organization, as well as individuals' mindset. Like people can go through life changes where they had the aspiration and now they don't. So, making sure that we're staying on top of that, not linking things to talent outcomes, right? So that we've got clear metrics and understanding of what we're trying to do to what degree and to the degree to which we're hitting the mark so that we can continue to make improvements and gains on that. And then often we see cohort programs that don't have any degree of individual development. It's all cohort based versus giving people the opportunity and through that coaching relationship or other forums for people to work on the things that are unique to them and is not necessarily common across their cohort. And then I'd say one of the biggest gaps that we see is if we think about high potentials as your big bet in the organization, the folks that can really do something meaningful in the future, the parallel I would draw is that this is a kind of like having a gifted child, and how you parent a gifted child is a little different than how you parent other children. So those high potential managers actually need help to understand what their role is and how they need to operate differently to
Yes.
enable those high potentials to be able to accelerate into what we're trying to achieve in that high potential. And so, with this all kind of as our backdrop, we do have a few views on when we're working to design the development end of the spectrum of a high potential program, some of our divine elements that we put at play here. One, it needs to be experiential, right? hands-on, integrated, doing, engaging, and acting, and that it does need to be cohort-based with peers. Often the folks who are coming through the organization, because as they move up into executive roles, them going through these cohort-based experiences, building the relationships across and with one another, allows them to accelerate as they are moving at different phases into those roles, because they're building really stronger connections with the people who are going to be the leaders in the future. Then we have the strategic leadership capabilities, business acumen. Matt kind of touched on that. That it's more than just understanding, how you're gonna pull on levers to drive the balance sheet, right? There's a lot more complexity as we think about connecting the dots and moving things within the organization. There's an element here about actually having them actively engage with executives or senior leaders. So this isn't just the senior leaders coming and doing their pump up kickoff and letting people know and then coming back at the end and doing a little wrap up call. This is actually integrating opportunities, whether it's sponsorship opportunities or integrated projects that they're working on where they're getting to engage and having some opportunity experience learning and projects with executives. So it's really integrated. And then we talked about the individual leader support, and this really helps for those who, we won't go deep into this, but it's about accelerating vertical development and being able to engage for people to focus on the things that are personal to them. And then this element of an outside-in perspective, right? So whether that's bringing in the view of the customer, whether it's bringing in from other industries and allowing people to kind of expand their thinking and moving beyond the confines of the organization so that they're able to bring an outside-in perspective. And then, of course, we talked about this emphasis on assessing readiness and capabilities and really developing against those gaps. And sitting underneath that as that high potential. How do we actually help their managers also develop their capabilities to be supporting these folks? So that's kind of our critical design elements. I'm going to take a very brief moment. I'm not going to clear this slide because it's very busy. I promise it will be, if those are curious, in a deck that you'll get later. Please don't get a headache from this, but this is an example of a type of a very robust high potential journey or program. And I'm only going to highlight here how you can see that there's immersion experiences interspersed with assessment, interspersed with go-dos where they have to go and like engage and do things and practice stuff and then coming back and being held accountable to that. There's different here around coaches. There's how do we engage that outside in perspective. It's kind of all in the like a 6 month sort of cohort. And it doesn't end there. It doesn't end there. And Matt already talked about that ongoing kind of assessment piece, but it puts a little bit of a confine and a bow on the development and then what it is that you take from there. We've also got some views here around what does it mean to look to actually help the manager of high potentials develop. And there's different ways that we approach and we work with clients around what's their appetite for helping those managers kind of up their game as they're thinking about working with high potentials. Whew, I know that was a lot that we went through. Hopefully folks have some questions. We've got a few, we're going to open up the space for questions, but first, there's a very important thing. We know everybody's been waiting for this, which is who wins the raffle contest. So, Ivy.
So Ivy, who's the winner?
Yeah.
Thank you, Nancy, Claude, and Matt. I'm thrilled to share that Kim Withers has won $100 off a Brandon Hall Group Institute membership. Congratulations to Kim. We'll be reaching out shortly with more details.
Fantastic. All right, folks, we would maybe Claude, I'll throw this over to you to give a little instruction around how do we broker this Q&A.
Yeah, so I've got a couple we can start with, and feel free to throw any more. We have a couple, and if you want to throw any more in there, we'll try to handle as many as we can with brief responses. The first one is our leaders already think they know in quotes, right, who the high potentials are. How do we bring them along in shifting to more of a future back approach?
Yeah. Matt, do you want to jump in
That's
first?
tough.
Sure. Yeah, I can speak.
Yeah.
It's hard, and it is reality too. And the higher stakes the hypo program is, the more sometimes senior leaders have conviction around the people they've identified. One way to go about it is an element like future back thinking, or even the first kind of precursor steps of thinking about the future, can be a great way to bring in the executive perspective. So, it's less about trying to solicit names from them, but more about getting them to just explore what it is that they're trying to solve for from a high potential standpoint and what it will mean to the organization in the future. Channeling and sort of redirecting the energy that they're bringing to the exercise to thinking about what it'll mean to the organization in terms of how high potential is defined, and then using that as a way to bring consistency and rigor around identifying those high potentials.
Yeah, and I'm going to give a really cheeky response to this, which is a little bit political, and that's using the board or the highest level as a lever to say, hey, basically, so this is about moving people off of perceived, they believe they know what's right, and how helping them to get to there's a different way that we need to operate. And so, yes to everything Matt said, but I've also been on the inside in organizations, and so sometimes being able to pull that I think we do have a sense of it. And I know that we need to make sure that there's comfort at the senior levels and at the board that we're doing all of the things with the data and science and that we're giving this consideration. So let's kind of go through this exercise so we can make sure that we're demonstrating that we're following all due diligence. And we've got some practices here that we can put to the table. So it's kind of putting people's feet to the hot fire around the risk management and that we need to have some degree of rigor to demonstrate, and that we're confident that the things that they've already believed will come to the table, and it may or may not. But I find that if I'm working with clients, there's a lot of times where that political lever is a way to just help push people
Yeah.
into being open to. And again, we can agree or disagree whether that's the right way to do it, but if we're honest with ourselves, sometimes just pulling on that lever can be helpful.
So we have probably time for one or two more. We have a question from Magana. Can you give specific examples of managers activating high potentials?
Yeah. So let me pull back actually to the slide here a little bit to give this make it easier to bring that context a little bit. So when some of the ways that they do that is by so this is how we help them get some of the skills, and then we're doing that. Some of the ways they do it is through sponsorship, right? So the idea is you need to help your high potentials get access to, so that's profile, like what's the meetings that you're bringing to them, what's the special project that you're putting them on, what's the stretch opportunity, where are you giving them exposure, where is it that you're putting them in a hot spot that is a little uncomfortable for you to let go of owning something. You've got to convince those managers to give up something that they're accountable for in the spirit of helping this person take on different space. So that's kind of a big part. Now there's others around giving them space for them, like some of the things that we know to be true in general for any manager around how do you safeguard it, give them the space to be able to engage in that, to enable some of that activation. But the number one really is the sponsorship aspect of they need to be willing to step in and give people to let go of some things themselves and give more ownership and then hold them accountable for that and putting the supports in place around it.
Here's a question that I think is implicit in some of the other things we talked about, and that is how do we differentiate between high performance and high potential in a way that leaders will actually buy into?
Matt?
Yeah, it's I think there are a couple ways to take it, and this may be where in the company the X factor piece is helpful. But broadly speaking, the potential element is just the ability to have a step function different impact in the organization for the long term, be it around being able to understand challenges and problems, to connect the dots, to achieve things that are not currently within the scope of work being done. It's more than just sort of the elasticity of taking on more and doing more. It's about people who are able to bring a fundamentally different approach to making sense of the context in the organization, the work to be done, and then be able to set in place the plans to achieve those things.
And at the end of the day, performance is table stakes,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Performance is table stakes. We're not going to be engaging anybody in this who isn't a high performer. So check the box, high performer. Now we have to differentiate across our high performers from those. So to me, that's the argument that enables people to open up to why we need to do the work because it is not just about taking our high performers. It is about being able to distinguish our high performers from those who really have the capability to do something differentiated in the future in the way that we need them to. And their indicators of past performance is not adequate for us to be able to predict that. That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, and another more provocative way of saying that same thing is that saying, right? What got you here won't necessarily get you there. The
Right.
performance is important to a point, but a lot of models of high potential has three levels: performance, potential, and I'm forgetting the other right now, but the performance just should be a third, and a lot of times in organizations it's two-thirds or three-quarters, and it really you need to be able to move beyond that. And a lot of times a high performer maybe that maybe the level of that person is, and there's not potential for anything
They
more,
may
but
have
we
peaked.
keep, yeah, we can't, if we don't think beyond the performance, we won't get to the real answer.
Yeah. I think we're at the top of the hour here,
Yep.
Claude.
I think we'll have to leave it there and really thank everybody for their active participation and for taking the time to join us today. And thank you to Nancy and Matt and BTS for their great insight and great presentation. It's always a pleasure to work with BTS. So thanks, everyone. We hope you'll join us on a webinar in the near future. In the meantime, I hope everybody has a great holiday season. Get some rest and relaxation with family and friends, and we hope to see you again real soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us.
Take care.